now this is the pressure of we feel like we start the podcast, start the recording. I'm Claire Frost. I'm the host of the Howard Fine Acting Studio podcast, Fine Tuning Your Craft. And I'm here today in a very fancy studio. We're at Balloon Tree Productions. So you'll notice there's been a big jump in quality and sound quality today, as well as I've got a couple of cameras set up. So full transparency, I'm kind of married to the owner of Balloon Tree, so I have an in. So I'm joined today by Stephanie Wall and Jess Martin. Steph is a musical theatre actor. She is incredible at what she does. I've had the privilege to also be working with her in the Howard Fine office for the last couple of months. She's been helping out and it's been really fun. We are also joined by Jess Martin, who is faculty slash teacher slash awesome person of Howard Fine Acting Studio. And so pleased to have them.
Thanks
Welcome.
for having
Thank you
us,
very
Claire.
much.
This is very exciting.
Yeah.
So, Steph, can you tell me a bit more about your background and experience in acting and musical theatre?
Yeah, so I've been performing, singing, dancing, acting from a very young age. I trained in a Bachelor of Arts of Music Theatre at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, also known as WAPA. I graduated that in 2016. I went on to the national tour of The Wizard of Oz, where I was in the ensemble and I understudied Dorothy. I've also performed nationally in the tour of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, where I understudied the narrator and was also in the ensemble. I've worked as a swing in the musical The Who's Tommy with the Victorian Opera, and I've also worked in independent shows, in musical theatre, and a little bit of straight plays, but my forte is music theatre and working in all stages of shapes and sizes around Australia.
Wonderful. Can I just ask, when you went to WAPA, did you go there straight from high school?
I did. I remember, so I'm from Wagga in New South Wales, and they sat me down and they said, now, Perth is a fair way away from Wagga Wagga. Would you be ready to go? And I said, yes, straight away. Please get me out of this little country town, which I've grown to love so much and appreciate so much. I grew up in Wagga and it was just such a beautiful, supportive environment, and it was a really nice next step to move all the way to Perth on the other side of the country.
Wow. I will also mention for those listening, if you are wondering what a swing is, that will come up later. We have a special guest joining us via audio clip. Jack Connor Rowan was so kind to send in some of his thoughts and his experiences, because he's currently a swing for Miss Saigon that's currently on tour in Australia, so that's very exciting. So Jess Martin, who are you?
Hello. Yes.
How did you come into acting, and what's your background? Do you have any background with musical theatre as well?
So straight after high school, I went and studied a Bachelor of Creative Arts in Drama and Dance at Deakin. And then following that, I trained full-time at the Howard Fine Acting Studio, doing the full-time program. Then the past 10 years have been continually training at different studios around Melbourne and with the Howard Fine Acting Studio, and working professionally in the industry as an actor. My background with musical theatre, I love musical theatre. Absolutely love it. I've done more independent amateur musical theatres, independent and
Amateur shows?
would you say?
Amateur musicals?
Yeah. So I did a lot when I was growing up, and then when I was at uni. So not professionally, but I love it. And yeah, I'm, my profession now is, as well as a professional actor, I work as a faculty member and teacher at the Howard Fine Acting Studio. So I'm really interested in this conversation around applying acting technique to musical theatre, because it's so vital and so important. Being a teacher, I work with a lot of students, both in musical theatre, both in straight acting. It's really cool. It's exciting.
Wonderful. I'm going to slide in and say my experience with musical theatre is something I've always wanted to do, but I've never been a confident singer. So where I'm coming at as I interviewed today is I did a few amateur productions myself when I studied at Deakin, and I loved it. And I remember I was always chorus, and this one particular show, it was Fame, and I was in the background and they gave me the musical thing of like doing a ha, but I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't understand that you could get someone to teach you how to do it. So I did it, and it was awful, but I enjoyed it.
It's so fun.
I enjoyed
love it
opening up
too.
my lungs and didn't particularly care for the sound that came out, but I did it and I was dancing and I was having fun.
It's very freeing, isn't it?
Absolutely. So my experience has veered more towards acting because musical theatre has felt like such a separate thing that was just a club that I couldn't do because I didn't start in high school.
It's fascinating. I feel like from a musical theatre industry perspective, acting world, straight acting world, film and television world in Australia, there is a huge separation of ideologies. And I think today we'll talk a lot about how this needs to be married a whole lot more, these two. It's not even two different disciplines. It's ensuring that working as a professional in music theatre or doing music theatre, it's storytelling through song. And with acting, it's storytelling through song. You are the storyteller, and we're just using music to heighten, to move people in a different way, to entertain in a different capacity. And I feel like in the States, there's a lot more of a combination and a unifying of the two industries. And Australia, I think, is getting there. And I think at How Fine we're doing a lot of great things to close the gap, and would love to continue to close the gap and speak about that a little more today.
Amazing. So we're going to move into our next question. How important is actor training for musical theatre performers, and how has it personally influenced your performances?
Yeah, it is really everything. It's the glue that ties everything together. Like I said, musicals, music theatre is storytelling through song. Storytelling is the core of that. And your acting technique, your skills determine how specific, how sophisticated your storytelling can be. I found that studying the Howard Fine technique, when I sort of fell into the training in 2020 during lockdown, I found the technique through Jess, who's also my partner, and behind the curtain. Fiance.
You've got such a finite time. You can call each other fiance.
Yes.
You got to milk it.
Got to really milk it. I found the training in 2020 in lockdown, and up until that point, I had done 3 years of full-time training in music theatre where these tertiary courses try to fit everything in they possibly can, but you can't, especially coming in as an 18, 19-year-old, which most of us are. We're still learning how to be a human in the world. It's impossible to have those 3 years and go, great, one and done, let's hit the ground running, and you don't need any further training. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, acting was the discipline that I felt the least confident about. I think that a lot of people in the industry that I know come in because they're exceptionally good singers or exceptionally good dancers, and they're great at storytelling through song, but the acting is something that may not be a discipline that they're more confident in. And for me, that was the case. I felt like I could get by, but it would be the thing that would make me a little bit more nervous when heading into an audition room. And finding the technique, I was really able to find this clear, concise, distilled formula of script analysis that allowed me to quickly and successfully, without fail every single time, be able to analyse a script, analyse a song for auditions and for shows. And I think one of the most important parts of when you're actively auditioning in music theatre, the turnaround is so quick. It's quick in straight acting, it's quick in almost every creative industry, but for musicals as well, especially, the turnaround is so quick. You may have a self-tape due in a couple of days to a week. You may be going in where you have to learn 2 songs and a scene. I remember for The Wizard of Oz, I had to learn the Somewhere Over the Rainbow, thankfully a song that almost everyone knows. And they gave 40 pages of script work for Dorothy. So you have to be able to work fast, even in the audition stages. And I found that it was that speed of making sure that I understood who my character was, where I lived inside the character within a matter of days, sometimes hours. When you're in an audition room, they might give you another song. I remember when I auditioned for Mamma Mia in 2017, they gave me 2 of Sophie's new songs, and I knew the song because it's ABBA. But how can you, in the matter of 40 minutes to 3 hours, analyze this script? And I think I didn't have those tools at the time. And finding the technique, the 8 steps specifically, is what I'm referring to. I'm able to sit down and within a span of anywhere from an hour to a day, depending on how specific I'd like to get and the time I have, can analyze a song, analyze a script before I even get on my feet and start making sound or start reading with Jess if it's a scene. So working quickly and working specifically and getting a great outcome every single time has been paramount in my success over the past couple of years in music theatre. And I'll talk a little bit later on, but in music theatre, there's a big segment or a big part of working in musicals, especially big budget musicals, main stage shows, is that you'll often understudy, you'll often cover, which means you will be the next in line for if a principal or a leading performer is sick or can't do the show that particular night, you will be an understudy or you will be a swing. For example, in Wicked, I've been told that 90% of the people on that stage in the ensemble understudy or swing, and it's often multiple roles. So you not only have to have your ensemble track in your head or your supporting lead track in your head, track meaning your character, what you do throughout the show, you have to be ready to step on stage at any given moment in your understudy, your cover track. A swing, which Jack, I'm sure we'll get into, is the same thing as an understudy, but instead of understudying the lead, you're understudying the other ensemble members. So that could be an offstage swing or an onstage swing, which again, I'm sure Jack will talk more about. But that really calls back to how fast and specific you need to be when working in music theatre or performing in an amateur independent pro-am setting. Talking from my experience in professional music theatre, where you might have 3 auditions in a week, or you might be understudying, for example, for me, the narrator, where she has about 42 minutes of singing or talking on stage, and she's on stage basically the whole time, only leaves for about 5 to 8 minutes throughout the whole show, and it's a 90-minute show. So you have to work very quickly and to get to that specific, confident, consistent level.
Really side tangent. What if you have to go to the toilet?
So you don't. So especially in the narrator, it was a jumpsuit. We only had the one costume, thankfully.
I saw pictures.
So it's this one jumpsuit, and the great thing about Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is the show that I'm referring to, the first act is about, I think, 50 minutes. The second act's about 35, 40. So it's enough that you won't be 2.5 hours into one act needing to burst. I know that Legally Blonde, you can't take a toilet break, and she has so many costume changes, and it is a solid maybe hour and a half. I would say the first act of Legally Blonde is.
The person who's skipping rope surely must be able to go to the toilet before she does that, though.
Yes, that would be insane. But it is an issue that you just pray,
you just learn,
and you hope you drink enough water to stay hydrated, but you don't drink so much that you're going to be bursting. And I've definitely needed to go to the bathroom on stage and had to just hold it.
Wow. That is, yeah. So in amongst your musical theatre training and your actor training, please do bladder training.
Yes.
If you're going to get into musical
The
theatre.
Kegels are very important.
The biggest message of this podcast.
Yes. This will be the
Takeaway point.
Train your bladder. So speaking of acting training for musical theatre performers, and you mentioned before, Steph, about the script breakdown and learning how to do that through training at Howard Fine. So there's a lot of character development that goes on that I'm hearing that perhaps musical theatre training focuses on dancing, singing, and all the stuff that is incredibly important in musical theatre. But then there's that next level down that is, I want to say granular. I don't know if that's the right terminology in this instance. So Jess, in your teaching experience, how do you then approach the character development, approach the script techniques, especially for experienced actors who not just musical theatre but have other experiences in other fields? But obviously we're talking about musical theatre now. How do you bring that into it?
I think what's interesting that's specific to musical theatre is a lot of the musicals that, say, are coming to Australia to be produced are shows that we have a lot of access to in forms of the Broadway original cast recording or the West End cast recording that have been done exceptionally well. Often you can find videos of these productions online. It can often lead to a sense of, oh, that's how it should be played. That's how it's done. That's where the character lives. My biggest advice when working with any actor approaching a role or audition for musical theatre is finding that character within yourself. So acting is never about reaching for something outside of us. It's always to do with finding it in ourselves, finding a personalisation for it. So with acting technique and acting training, it's great having a script analysis process that allows you to dive into the script, look at what the given circumstances are, look what the writer has given you, what is this story, what is your role as a character in this story, and start building your character from that place, from a script analysis, understanding point of view. And then once you figure that out, where does this character live inside me? And using your own personal experience, your own imagination to connect, to storytell.
Yes. So, Steph, what has been your experience with that as touring a show, when especially I think multiple actors are playing the one role? How have you found that?
Yeah, it's been a game changer, the concept of finding where you live inside the character. I found that the most empowering aspect of the technique, which is what I studied, so I can only speak from my personal experience. When doing work on Joseph, where I was understudying Paulini as the narrator, it was all about finding myself, and that was direction given by our resident and our associate director and the UK creatives. They wanted Stephanie as the narrator because the narrator doesn't have a name. She is the narrator, and when Paulini would play her, she was Paulini as the narrator. When it was me, it was Steph as the narrator. When Avi, who was the other understudy, it was Abigail as the narrator. And I found that so empowering, and I think before studying this technique, it would be extremely intimidating. I remember thinking before really diving deep into my acting training post-graduating, I was scared to use myself because I didn't think it would be enough. And I thought, how can I do it as this person? And as well as having so much access in main stage musicals, which for a lot of people is the goal, I want to be on a main stage performing a show for 9 months to 2 years, maybe longer, and that be part of a huge step in my career. So as well as that, most shows that come to Australia that are main stage, you pick up the set, you pick up the costumes, and they move straight into the Regent Theatre or the Princess Theatre. And not only that, but if they're the same costumes that have been used before, can you fit this particular costume of, say for Wicked, Ozzy and Number 3, who covers Glinda, but also Madame Morrible, where you have to be fitting all of these costumes. I know that for The Wizard of Oz a couple of years ago, this was a costume that was just altered to fit me. So if I was any taller than my height, maybe I wouldn't have gotten the show if I was any shorter. So there's that as well that you're working against. And I think that it's so important to keep using yourself. And coming back to my script analysis and my work on my character as a narrator, knowing that myself was enough and that I could be Daggy Steph, a little bit silly, very excitable, very physical, having the most fun time on stage, that was enough compared to Paulini, who was very sassy and cool and mature, and we were so different. But that's why it worked, and that's what allowed me to connect with the audience every night as narrator, where there is a huge amount of music, about 42 minutes of straight singing, because the whole thing is sung through as well. So not only is it a musical, but there are absolutely no lines of dialogue, which I think is easier than a scene to song musical, in my opinion.
Wild.
Yeah.
The core of good acting is bringing yourself. Anybody can bring an idea of a character, play an idea, but nobody can be you. You in your original self is what you have to offer in this art form, in any acting.
And if I went up there and tried to be Paulini,
it wouldn't work.
Absolutely would not work. Not only are we very different people, but she is a queen pop star sensation. And at first, I remember being a little bit intimidated by her vocal gravitas and what she could do. Her riffs, which is what you were mentioning in Fame, were just out of this world. She has a quality that is so different to me. And me coming from the music theatre world, very cookie cutter music theatre world, how am I going to be enough to this superstar Paulini? But knowing that what I can use is my connection to the little Steph inside of me, connecting to these young kids, because there are about 8 children in the show in Joseph who play the children. That can be where I can use myself, be authentic, and connect to everybody else and bring out their inner child, as an example.
You had a lot of success as your role as a narrator, got a lot of great feedback, and I think it's such a testament to your huge work ethic and your training. Also, you were beautifully guided by your directors on the show, who worked in a similar way with similar techniques of what we've
They truly let me, Avi, and all of the understudies and swings find themselves. That's not always what you're going to get in a director, which I think is a conversation for a different day, of navigating different directors and teachers. But it was such a joy, and is so important to, if you aren't being guided by the director, knowing that within yourself.
I think that's a good thing about acting training, is that it's giving you the confidence to be able to look after yourself, to be autonomous, not rely on in a great scenario where you've got a beautiful director who speaks the same language, can really help you. That's excellent. In situations where you don't, it's allowing yourself to take ownership of your creative process. And
Amazing. That's a really interesting point about you finding yourself within the character, because I think a lot of audiences, that's what attracts them to the actor within the character. And I can appreciate the pressure when we get specifically sent the Broadway cast recording on Spotify. And I'll use Hamilton as an example. I saw that Jonathan Groff. I saw him as the king, and you're just like, whoa. And then I saw it in Melbourne, and I actually saw, I want to say it was the second understudy play. Oh, not even his character. I'm getting mixed up between characters. Anyway, my point being, I saw a show where it was predominantly the understudies, and they all brought such different energy that I wasn't expecting. And I was just blown away, because I wasn't expecting this. I was expecting what I'd seen on Netflix. I was expecting what I'd been listening to. I was one of the top listeners of the Hamilton soundtrack on Spotify that year. So that's kind of what I was expecting. And then to get something different was such a revelation. It wasn't a negative experience by any means. It was just, whoa, I hadn't seen the character that way. I hadn't perceived it that way, and all these different actors had brought themselves, and I really appreciate that. As it is raw, it is vulnerable, and I can appreciate how full on that experience is. I obviously don't know their training, but yeah, I can really appreciate how full on that is.
It must have felt really newly alive, which is
Yes.
a phrase that we hear a lot in that training, but that's what we're wanting to aim for, is newly alive each time.
So I've got a list of questions that I'm probably super obvious as a host that I tick them off my list. And I feel like we've covered a lot. So just totally circle back if you want to make a point about anything. But I find it interesting about any challenges you've had to come. That you being an understudy for Paulini and finding yourself in that, has that been the biggest challenge? Has there been other challenges that you'd like to speak on?
Yeah, it was a big challenge, and I would say it is the most recent challenge that I've had to overcome, is not knowing if I was enough because of how different the person that I was covering was. And you are guiding the show as the narrator. You are telling the story. And I remember one of the, if you don't know the story of Joseph, it's a reimagined Bible story where Joseph is the best treated son. His brothers steal his beautiful Technicolor Dreamcoat, and it's this story of Joseph overcoming all the odds to become the second in command to the great Pharaoh at the time and forgiving his brothers. It's a fable, it's an allegory about forgiveness and love coming through and winning. So as the narrator, this show was written in the 60s, so it's relatively dry if you play it super duper sincerely as it would be played in 1963. I think it was first created, and it was created for a school. So not only that, but you've created it, Andrew Lloyd Webber, who wrote it, created it for a completely different audience. So in 2023, how will this be entertaining? And one of the directions I would get a lot is, Steph, can I swear on this podcast?
Absolutely.
Stir shit. Stir shit when you're the narrator. You're outside the story. You're in a completely different outfit to everybody else, so you stand out. Stir shit in this story. You know, this story is going to be different to how you've all heard it before. And so how do I do that? There was also a lot of comedy within the show. And that's another obstacle of how do I play comedy? And that's something that I learned through the technique of finding the contrast within a scene or within a song. But the confidence to stir shit in my own way. I'm pretty goofy. I like to dance around and be very silly and poke a lot of fun. And so finding that within myself really empowered me. And also having a very strong point of view. I think that was paramount in having success, because I not only had to tell the story, but I had to let the audience know how you should feel about the other 15 people on the stage. So over time, I had the great joy of, as an ensemble member, getting to know all of the 12 brothers who were ensemble members quite well over the 6-month period. And so they don't know this, but my opinions of them as the brothers was very similar to my opinions of them as people. Ooh. But I got to have a very clear point of view of, okay, this person, he's sweet, he's the baby of the group, this guy, thinks he's the funniest one alive, So I can have that point of view. And so the audience is with me, they're not ahead of me, and I can catch them up at times, but having a really clear point of view of how I feel about Joseph. So I look up to Joseph. I think he is amazing in what he's gotten through. I think the brothers, who are doing a pretty nasty thing right now, they're a bit ridiculous. They all look like fools, and they're going to be all foolish by the end of Act 2. So a really clear point of view, which was strengthened through my acting training with Howard Fine, was paramount. And I think when taking that into other auditions, that was a solution to an obstacle of how do I, of script analysis.
What a perfect segue to the teacher in the room.
Yes, I'm loving this. I love these conversations. So I think a particular challenge with musical theatre is that often, especially in professional musical theatre, you're performing on a large stage to a theatre of an audience of anywhere from 100 to 2,000 people. You have to have full investment in everything that you're doing. I think a common misconception is that musical theatre can lead into overacting, which is a term that I don't use, overacting. But essentially what people are trying to say with that is that they're overacting is pushing for something that you don't feel. So with musical theatre, we have to be fully invested in everything so that it's not overacting. We only perceive, as an audience, size when there's a gap between motivation and execution. So that's what people would call overacting.
It's funny, I've just had this image of when I think of overacting, I think of Shakespeare. And I've just had this realization, but that perhaps it's because the actor hasn't connected to the script, hasn't connected to the character. Wherefore art thou? Just big on stage.
So people, that's exactly right. It happens with Shakespeare as well. People will watch a production. It is when it's done well, musical theatre or Shakespeare, a lot of similarities. When it's done well, it's fully invested, fully alive. We don't watch it and see, oh, that's too much. That's too much. But to do that, fully invested, fully alive, and that may lead to something seems big. It takes a lot of skill to do that. It takes a lot of training and a lot of technique. Someone who maybe isn't trained might watch that and go, oh, to play Shakespeare, I need to be big. Or to do musical theatre, I need to be big.
Music theatre acting is a phrase I've heard a lot. And
yes, music theatre acting. Whereas acting is acting. It's in you're acting in different formats. Yeah. Television acting is different in a sense to stage acting, to musical theatre acting, because you're working on a different scale.
That is so interesting you bring that up. For it to be the correlation between, because we have a lot of people ask about film acting versus theatre acting. And so there's, versus musical theatre acting. So what you're telling me then is same technique for all of those?
Yes.
That's a very leading question. Sorry.
Same acting technique there is different skill sets that you need for different mediums. Being in musical theatre or live theatre, you need a very trained voice, very trained body, not even talking about being singing training or dance training, but even live straight theatre.
Bladder training,
need a very strong bladder. You do need these things with on camera as well, but there is a different perception. If I'm being filmed talking to you across the table right now, there is only so much
energy output, do you think?
Well, in terms of intention and for me to communicate clearly with you, what do I want? Who are you? What do I want? I can do that. There's only so much. It's a psychological of distance thing. There's only so much I need to communicate to you right there. If I need to communicate to somebody across the stage, knowing that there is a huge theatre there that I have to send my voice, send my intention around, there's a different level of will, vocal will, verbal will, intention that I need to communicate to that person.
Yeah.
So in the case of musical theatre, full investment to get your message across.
Because then with musicals, the scene work, if there is scene work between songs, it is, I like to think of it like poetry. It is distilled to the smallest, most concise scene and dialogue and set of text between songs. And the songs is where, for 99.9% of songs, they're there because words have failed to express what the character needs to express. Verbal will. the need to send this needs to match, and with the correct when there is correct and enough motivation behind the text.
Absolutely. So coming back to that term overacting, I can't pretend to really invest. I have to genuinely invest. I have to genuinely connect. I have to understand who you are. What do I want? What are the circumstances?
And it moves so fast in music theatre that is a trap of music theatre. All of this moves so fast, so you have to know what you want, what you need, what you want from the other character, your point of view.
It's an exceptionally challenging medium to do really well.
Yeah, you made me think of a vocal exercise I did quite some time ago where me saying hey to you right here is this. If you're on the other side of the room, hey is different. You're on the other side of the road, hey.
Totally.
So there are different things that come into it that don't involve less or more investment. And it's, again, the same technique. It's just what I'm using in my body to project, what I'm using as, the verbal will to connect is all interesting.
I'd love to talk about another misconception.
Yes, please.
Quickly, that was really solidified for me when I was putting in a self-tape recently. And I think talking from the perspective of when you go in to sing a song for an audition. And often, similar to actors with having their monologue book, we have our song book, our repertoire rep book of songs. And I think it's a huge trap for singers to have the most impressive songs to bring in, and not even a perfect song for every occasion, but just something super duper impressive, which might be for women a belting up to an E, or a legit soprano operatic sound up to a C. For tenors, it might be, I think, a G. These sort of note goals. And I think that is an unhelpful way to think about auditions and to think about musicals, because then you're taking the storytelling out of the rep that you get to choose to show who you are and if you fit into this character. And all musical theatre auditions are, same with acting, is can we see you as the character? And this was reminded, I was reminded from this again, where this show was casting where it was all songs work from the show, because in some musicals they'll say two contrasting songs in the same style of, say, Rent or Mamma Mia. For this show, it was, we need a song, this song from the show if you're going for this character. And this particular character was a song where it wasn't a particularly difficult song. It's a song that a lot of performers can do really, really well. And my first instinctive thought was, how am I going to stand out? If this is a really easy song, like there's going to be singers than me that can do this better. It's not going to be impressive. And then that was the trap I'd realized I'd instinctively fallen into for the first time thinking about this. And it really calls back to, it's not about that. There is power in the fact that 250 people can sing this song really well, which is probably the amount of submissions that this casting director will get. The point of difference, it's storytelling through song. Why is this song here? It opens Act 1. It's a very relaxed song that stays in this sort of dynamic, not a huge range, about an octave range, which isn't crazy. They're looking for actors. They're looking for people that can storytell through song. You think of Come From Away, incredibly strong actors to pull that show off. For Hamilton as well, it moves so fast. And, you could say this with every show, but that is where storytelling is paramount, because you're not going to impress the panel with your voice if that's what you're thinking through doing this song. And I think it goes both ways. Don't try and bring in this song where you can belt up to a crazy note if you're not connected to the song, because you're so in your head about, I need to hit this particular note. I need to work my singing technique in a crazy way to impress these people. When if you're losing out on your storytelling and your acting technique, you're not going to move or connect to people, and they won't see you as a character in the show.
So this is really interesting. And Jess, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. So Steph, what you've just talked about is, with singing the song. And so given circumstances, right? And you're not just singing the song to be like, look at my voice. You're also communicating what are the three entrances or the three questions before you enter a scene. It's what did I just do? Where am I coming from? What is my first?
What is the first thing that I want?
Exactly, yeah. And so would you say that connects into the what you're singing as well, bringing that in?
So it's, what has just happened. Talking about your opening moment for any song, any scene, it's Uta Hagen's 3 questions that you can, that you can ask yourself. So, what has just happened? Where am I right now? And what's the first thing that I want? And going for that.
For example, very quickly to put it into this perspective of this song, which is, I won't say the show, little peek behind the curtain, but what has just happened? This woman has just been slighted by another man who only really wants her for her body, who wants her as a one-night stand. What is happening right now? It's a soliloquy, so the audience, it's a direct address to the audience. I am realizing that the audience have judged me, or the people who I've chosen as my audience, say the townspeople, friends, which harks to soliloquies, work. What's happening right now is that I'm being judged for the way that I live my life, where I say yes to any man who wants to sleep with me. And what's the first thing I want? I want to be understood of how I ended up in this position and why I live my life like this. I want to be understood by the audience.
The biggest challenge when starting any scene or a song is to get rid of that feeling of starting of now I'm going to act, now I'm going to do the thing. So giving yourself a really clear opening moment is a runway into the fiction.
Yeah, that is super interesting. And I need to move along, but I just want to quickly ask, because you were saying about, singing into the audience. And so that's also a thing that we talk about a lot, the fourth side.
Yes.
And having that clear image. So you do that with an audition panel as well. Do you make eye contact? You're imagining them as the townspeople.
Yeah.
I suppose it's different if you're filming it.
It is and it isn't. If I'm filming it, which is what 99% of musical auditions are now for post-COVID. If I was filming something, if Jess was there, sometimes I use you as a body. If it isn't a soliloquy, I will direct it to the person that I'm singing it to, with a fourth side included of where I am, my sense of place. So if I am singing somewhere over, or I won't say somewhere over the rainbow because that's a soliloquy, but if I'm singing, I'm stuck for in Legally Blonde, where there's the breakup song between Elle and Warner. Elle is singing to Warner, Warner is singing to Elle. So it isn't a soliloquy, you're singing to the person. So that's where I would direct Jess just off camera, so I can be clearly seen, my eye line and my intentions can be seen through my eyes, but I'm not directly singing towards the camera. That can be very intense and intimidating. And if you do want to be very intense and intimidating, you'll be back from Hamilton. That could work, where you're singing it directly into the camera as part of the audience. If we're moving to soliloquy, you have your fourth side of wherever you are. So if this was Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz, it's a personal, private moment. You're with your dog, Toto. So your fourth side, you're singing out to the world that you wish to be a part of. What's over the rainbow? You're looking for the town that, is anyone listening out there? Could it be a person in the town that is this fabulous new life of Oz that Dorothy doesn't know is Oz yet? But you're singing out over the rainbow, where the panel now becomes the rainbow. You can...
I see it.
Yeah. You can look towards the panel. Soliloquy, it might just be a glance down, but you have to know who you're singing to. Because it is a personal, private moment for Somewhere Over the Rainbow, you may not be singing to a person. If it is You'll Be Back from Hamilton, I would definitely use the panel as one of your servants, because King George is singing to
I'd feel so intimidated.
Great Britain.
I hate eye contact.
You hate eye contact, which and honestly, that is where some panelists do. Some people on the panel don't like that. So a glance is fine, but don't stare down the panel. I personally, depending on how comfortable I feel, I will glance to them, make a brief amount of contact, but then I will glance more between them. So I've made the connection, but I'm not going to continually return to expect a reaction out of you. I want you to relax and be the audience and trust me. But that is my personal preference, and it really depends, again, song to song.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that a little insight. So just to move to Jess, A, do you have any insights on that? B, I'm so sorry. I wrote this question and I'm going to leave this in the podcast. It feels so salesy. What sets Howard Fine Acting Studio apart in terms of creating a conducive environment for performers to learn and grow? Who wrote that?
That sounds like a marketing question.
Who on earth would write a question like that? Goodness gracious me. In saying that, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Going back to what we said at the beginning, I think having a good acting technique, whether that's Howard Fine Acting Studio Australia or any technique, gives you the confidence to put into practice everything that Steph has so eloquently talked about in her process for developing character, for script analysis. I think there's so much to be said about having a craft that you can rely on, that you know inside out, that you know that you can tackle any script and not feel intimidated by. Anybody who is casting anything wants somebody to walk in and nail it, to take full ownership of the role, that they can cast into production and have full confidence in their ability. And I think if we as actors, as artists, want a panel of people to have full confidence in our ability, we need to have full confidence in our ability first. And how to do that is rigorous training, is experience. It's working with teachers and coaches or in a technique that you believe in and that you trust. And I always encourage anyone as actors looking for training to go try out different techniques, go try out different teachers, different studios, look at if you can audit any classes, look at free sample classes. Are there videos online of this technique? Listen to it and see if it resonates for you, because what will resonate for one person won't resonate necessarily for everybody, but finding a craft that you can invest in will give you that confidence.
Incredible. Thank you. Well, now I will play Jack's response. So again, full disclosure, I studied with Jack Connor Rowan in the part-time Howard Fine course in 2019. And what a privilege. He is such an incredible person. And I emailed him because I thought he's currently on tour. Perhaps he has time in his very busy schedule to send me some thoughts. And I'm so grateful that he did. So here we go.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to be completely honest. This is recording number 31 of me trying to get through this, but I keep getting embarrassed that I'm talking to myself in an empty room, or I make so many mistakes and fumble my words that it's going to take a million years for you to edit it, that I just start again. But you know what? It's now 10:30 at night. I'm so tired because I started this ages ago. I just have to commit. So this is me committing, and let that be lesson number 1 of what Jack has to say on acting technique in musical theatre, is you've got to commit. So this is me committing. That was me blowing an eyelash off of my phone because it was in the way, and I committed to that. Okay, also lesson number 2, you clearly don't have to be very intelligent to get by in this world of musical theatre, because if I was intelligent, I would have recorded this back when I, had just had a coffee. But on to lesson number 3. We're going to get to lesson number 3 later, because first I have to introduce myself. Hello, my name is Jack Connor Rowan. I studied at the Howard Fine Acting School. I did their part-time course just before COVID got its grasp on the world, and have been working in musical theatre ever since COVID released its grasp on the world. That sounded a lot more poetic in my brain, but I'm just unraveling at this point, so we're going to go with it. I booked my first job a little over a year ago. It was Phantom of the Opera with Opera Australia and Hand Opera on the Sydney Harbour. I then joined the international leg of The Wedding Singer. I then was dance captain and assistant choreographer of Beautiful, the Carole King musical at the Star Casino. I then did Singing in the Rain in concert, and I'm currently swinging Miss Saigon at the Sydney Opera House. Whew. Which, for 1 year worth of work, pat on the back, I am pretty happy with myself. What is a swing, you might be asking? You heard that word a few seconds ago. A swing is someone in the musical theatre world that covers a whole magnitude of tracks in the ensemble of a musical theatre show. What is a track? Well, a track is everything someone does from curtain up to curtain down. What they sing, what they dance, what they touch, what they say, what they do, what costumes they wear, the whole thing, that makes up your track. I'm sure someone has answered that question much more eloquently than right now, but we already know what we're working with right now, and that is my little peanut-sized brain. How I remember 10 tracks in Miss Saigon with this little peanut-sized brain, well, that's another question for a whole other podcast. But we got to move on to the first question. How important is acting technique in musical theatre? Okay, this is a super loaded question. A lot of people are going to answer it very, very, very differently. I'm going to give my 2 cents on how someone else might answer it before I say how I'm going to answer it. My 2 cents on how someone who primarily does principal roles in musical theatre, that is exactly what you think it is. That is the leads, that is the supporting leads, the whole 9 yards. They're going to say that acting technique is super important to what they do. From stepping into work to get ready for the role, what they do on stage, what they do off stage from de-rolling, what they do in the audition process. Acting technique is going to be so important to them. And anyone who is a brilliant actor should be taking singing lessons, because you are the ones who are going to book all of the principal roles. Trust and believe. How I'm going to answer this, as someone who's primarily spent most of my career in the ensemble, is that acting technique is going to be as important as you want it to be. And by what I mean in saying that is that with your singing training and your dancing training to get to where you are now, and that is in the room, you've probably already subconsciously, and unbeknownst to you, already learned all the acting fundamentals. Because you're telling a story, right? As long as you're willing to trust your gut and make a fool of yourself in the audition room and the rehearsal room and on stage, you're going to do fine. Do I want to go on record saying that there's no acting technique to what I'm doing? Absolutely not, but I'm willing to share the secrets with you. I think in the ensemble, a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of acting is being done by the principals. You're just helping to create that world. Obviously, if you want to swim and not sink, in case you are handed sides in the audition room because they are looking at you to cover supporting roles or principal roles, a good understanding of script analysis and all of those acting fundamentals are going to really assist you here. But if you're just really targeting on wanting to be a part of the ensemble and go for those more, dance captain roles, assistant dance captain roles, or even swinging, acting technique is going to really assist what you do in the room, but knowing what acting techniques you're doing on a day-to-day basis isn't that important, because like I said before, you're probably subconsciously already doing a lot of them. I have worked with plenty of brilliant storytellers, brilliant singers, dancers, and actors in the ensemble. plenty of times before that have never ever stepped into a professional acting class or even studied musical theatre. They're just trusting their gut. And they're leading with actor first, even though technically on paper that they're not. Thoughts to share with actors and aspirations. Thoughts to share with actors with aspirations in musical theatre. First of all, congratulations on coming to that phenomenal idea, which is using your acting skills in the world of musical theatre. If you want to make, all of your income off of acting, musical theatre is the world to do it. There's not, stage and screen stuff in Australia can be few and far between, but the musical theatre scene in Australia is thriving. There is a constant revolving door of massive commercial musicals that are making you sign run of play contracts, which is 14 months. That's 14 months of great paying work. I know a lot of actors, a lot of brilliant, brilliant actors who aren't working because they don't know how to sing and dance. In my opinion, it is one of the only ways to live and lead financially a normal life with just your acting skills. And when I say just your acting skills, I mean, obviously, you're dancing and you're singing, but I think there's a big argument to be made that all of those things are just different forms of acting, especially in the worlds of musical theatre, but another podcast. My other piece of advice is take singing lessons. If you are an actor, you should already be taking singing lessons. You should be just doing it for getting a much better understanding of your voice and how you use it, even if it's just for acting. But singing is the one thing you can't really cheat in musical theatre. There are a lot of shows that don't require dancing, but trust me, they all require singing. And not only that, in an audition environment, you're generally not dancing by yourself. You can you do it in groups. You can you might be able to hide in there somewhere. But the singing happens by yourself. You are standing in a room in front of a whole panel of people, of international creatives, and you are singing by yourself. So you can't cheat on that. That also kind of brilliantly segues me into my next thing I wanted to mention. Well, I just totally obliterated that brilliant segue by fumbling on my words. But in an audition process for musical theatre, you generally don't have an acting round. Sometimes you might be given sides, but generally most of the time you've got a dancing call and a singing call. So where does acting come into that? Well, it comes into all of it. You have to be entering that space believing in yourself that you are an actor first or foremost, even if you've never taken an acting class, because you're going to be telling a story through your singing, which is essentially just a monologue in melody, and you're dancing, where you're playing a character. You are not rocking up saying, "Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm going to dance for you." You need to play a role. I think that's what I wanted to say on that. I could really go into this in depth, but my brain is fried. I hope I've provided enough intellectual jargon to help contribute to the absolute phenomenal conversation that is going to be happening between Claire Frost, Jess Martin, and Stephanie Wall. But apart from that, please come see Miss Saigon at the Sydney Opera House. Well, we close there in a couple of weeks, but then you can come see us in Melbourne, and then I don't know if I can say any of the other cities yet, but get your ass to Melbourne or Sydney to come see Miss Saigon, and let me know when you're coming, because I will probably be on stage at this rate. My little swinging shoes are getting their time, let me tell you.
Oh, I love
We got a
it.
little peek behind the curtain there. I love that from
Yeah,
Jack.
that's really
what
lovely.
a talented human. Oh my goodness.
He's incredible. And so, yeah, he sent me that a few weeks ago. So I'm pretty sure from now, as of recording, probably as of when I release this, he will be in Melbourne.
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe they're all in Melbourne now.
Yay.
It's so interesting what he's talking about from his perspective of 10 roles that he's swinging and covering is just out of this world. And that's usually what you would get. When I was doing Tommy, it was 8. But that was quite a short run. So I'm sure that Jack has gone on for many, if not all, including split tracks, which would be covering 2 tracks, 3 tracks melded into one. And it being so important to, when you have to work so fast and jump into any role, what are the most important elements that you can hook into instead of picking up the whole book? Okay, 3 points. What can I lock into? Singing, dancing, and again, that ensemble work of creating a world, which in main stage music theatre, which we haven't really touched on as much, when you're in the ensemble, that is what you were doing. You were helping facilitate a world and working within that world. So really well put, that is your job. That is a massive element of your job. And a lot of your jobs, whether someone from Jack's experience of very heavy dancing, working in dance captain swing roles, which sometimes people talk about how they're half creative, half cast, because you have such a look behind the desk when you're in those roles, is that may be your trajectory, and that is where you will thrive and you will work. And maybe it will be in what we've mentioned, where for myself, I know that my skill set is in ensemble where I'm covering a principal, because vocally, I know that vocally and acting wise, I am at a place where I know that I can step into that role. But also my dancing, which is super duper important, is enough to work in an ensemble. And something we haven't touched on as much is the different tracks having different, very almost mechanical clockwork roles and responsibilities. So for me, I hope you don't mind me going off track a little bit to bring the two, Jack and myself's experiences together. But for example, in The Wizard of Oz, I was not very featured in dancing. I am a dancer. I would consider myself a dancer. But this particular track, because they need someone to cover Dorothy, and this would go for anyone that was covering one of the main Lion, Scarecrow, Tin Man, they were often not the featured dancers. There are about 2 or 3 dance ensemble members that would do quite heavy dancing. So that's where the beauty of main stage music theatre, where depending on where, if you want to look at it, where your skill levels sit at. I've been dancing for 20-something years, singing for 5 and acting for 1. There are places for you, because the roles in a musical to make it function are very mechanical, and that's where the business of show comes into play as well. And that can be it can be where instead of there being 15 roles that you could potentially do in a show that you're going in for, it's actually probably 1 that you're actually being auditioned for.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it leads into what Jack was saying, but also what you're saying is that within the professional musical theatre industry, there's people with varying different skill sets. People who've come from a very dance background who can sing and act, but dance is their strong suit, or people who would describe themselves as singers first, singers, actors.
Yeah.
I love that he's touched on about the whole having no acting experience, because I'm seeing that a lot in social media and content creators, and you've seen it a lot. But yeah, my point being is that I love that he has touched upon that, because I think a lot of people, especially social media content creators, especially people that just have that quote unquote natural instinct, which is amazing and very jealous. But yeah, it just goes to demonstrate we're all on different paths, and the way we come to the work is different. And then when we do come to technique and actor training, it comes in your own time. You can't see someone else's journey and say, or they didn't do this, therefore I don't have to do this, or they did this at this age. And I'm feeling this about the singing now, because I think I've spoken to you that I want to start singing. There's this feeling that because I'm coming at it in my 30s, I'm now too old.
Do you know that AFAB, assigned female at birth person's voice, matures in their 30s? Is at its best in its 30s. So
I feel that.
you're actually in your prime.
Wow.
So that's a little tidbit.
Wow.
Feel more empowered.
Wow. There you go.
I love what Jack was saying in that message about believing in yourself as an actor, whatever your skill or experience level is. I think that's so important, and I think that leads back to what we're saying about confidence. And like with any skill set, if you've had training in those skill sets, you're going to have the confidence to do that. I think that's one pathway to confidence. But there are a lot of people with great natural instincts who can jump in and have confidence in their ability. I think it's interesting this with this argument of natural ability versus technique and training. We often hear these glamorized stories of they've never done an acting class in their life, and then they booked this TV series or they booked this film, which can absolutely happen, especially now in the age of social media and celebrity and wanting to have people with profile in your productions because that draws in business. So people can assumingly step out of bed and into an acting role without a technique, in my opinion, without a technique, the longevity of a career isn't possible. However, you may jump from role to role and be able to learn on set with great directors and learn from experience. I think a lot of people who have never, quote, done an acting class have on-set coaches.
Oh,
That's
definitely
yes.
Yeah.
And people all work with good directors who are teaching them about the craft of acting. They're working in very high budget
We
settings.
never have the full picture.
Yeah, so it's great acting looks really easy. And that's why everybody thinks that they can do it or wants to try it. And there's a million reasons to try acting training or trying, because there's so many. It's such a rewarding career. You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about people. I could talk about that forever. But great acting looks effortless.
Yeah.
But it is technique.
Well, you got one more?
Can I?
Please.
Yeah.
I love talking to you. So please continue.
In terms of acting looking effortless and from the perspective of a singer-first music theatre, in the rise of self-tapes, where everything is self-tape first, you as a performer get instant feedback and instant ability to critique your own work, and you're also working in a medium close-up. Whereas pre-COVID, it'd always be just getting in the room, where you wouldn't have the immediate feedback and you'd also be about 5 to 10 metres away from the panel. I don't think it's so much about we're suddenly closer so we can see what slips through the cracks in terms of acting technique. I think it's because we're getting the immediate feedback, that we are watching ourselves and having to take 3 to 33 takes of a song or a scene, and we are seeing straight away, where am I not connected? What needs to be strengthened? And I think that is the future of music theatre, especially if you're submitting as a singer first. Less so for dancing, because it'll still most likely be in either a group setting or you'll just be doing a dance with a 0.5 iPhone camera, where it's less immediate, the feedback of acting and storytelling. But I think it's more important than ever for people who are self-taping for musicals to take on an acting training and taking in whatever capacity that is. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars a week at a school. It can be, there's so much online. There's so much of Howard's online. There's so much of so many different things. And the more that you watch yourself and that you can look back and self-critique, the better you'll also get as well. So I think there's nowhere to hide now in the current landscape of music theatre auditions for singing, for song and scene work.
What a lovely way to end this. There's nowhere to hide.
Nowhere to hide.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me. Jess Martin, Stephanie Wall, Jack Connor Rowan, thank you so much for taking the time to send in your notes. But yeah,